everyone. Today we have another guest, David Blumenfeld. He did a huge transformation regarding AI and real estate and many other sectors that we're going to go through. So, David, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Julio, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, David, for the sake of the audience, how would you characterize who is David Blumenfeld? I mean, how you explain yourself? What was your journey? How do you got here? Was it something from backstage long time ago? Was it something just nearby? Just for everyone to understand and have a better approach and know you better. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Are we talking about through my wife's point of view or my own? A little different.
Let's start with one and then we go through. Yeah.
All right, fair enough.
Right.
So I basically grew up. I grew up on the West Coast here in the U.S. And moved to San Francisco kind of right out of school, right out of college. Right to date myself, right as kind of the .com boom was starting to happen, and so. Saw that it was happening and was super interested in technology and jumped in and first cut my teeth at CNET Networks, which was kind of one of the more well-known companies at the time, and that was kind of everything around technology, technology media company essentially, and from there went to numerous startups. Focused on Wi-Fi and mobile technologies, and so then ultimately found myself with this opportunity to join Westfield Shopping Centers, Westfield Labs. So that was really my first entrance into real estate, and it was really the opportunity to take all of my technology background and combine it with a real estate platform that was across Australia, the US, and the UK. And so at Labs, we were really tasked for essentially bringing a digital layer into the physical environment, both for the shopper experience, the tenant experience, as well as kind of back-end building operations. And while at Labs, we sit in San Francisco, and so obviously there were a lot of international as well as domestic shopping center and retailer groups who were coming through the Bay Area kind of on their innovation tech tours. They were going to meet with Facebook and Google and Twitter, companies everybody knows. And at some point realized that, hey, Westfield Labs is also in San Francisco. They're actually doing technology, but in our industry. And so we would host a lot of these tours, and probably over the course of 6-7 years, we hosted about 100 different companies. And myself and my current business partner were usually the ones kind of presenting what we were working on, and we were fairly open book about what we were doing. And so we'd present, and more often than not, at the end of those meetings, these exec teams would kind of huddle, and then they'd turn to us and say, hey, do you think you guys can help us out too? And we'd have to, politely decline and say, sorry, we're for Westfield. We went back to, Westfield management more than once, said, guys, there's a business here, not just a cost center. But there were always these, understandably, there were always some competitive concerns to that. Yeah. And so late 2019, Kyle Spencer, my business partner, and I spun ourselves out to form NextRivet, which is really a PropTech consultancy, doing a lot of the things that we were doing at Labs, but really doing it for the rest of the world. And so we now have real estate clients in 15 countries. We work across obviously shopping centers, but as shopping centers have evolved, there are now a lot of mixed use properties involved in that. When I say mixed use, office as well as multifamily residential. So it's really providing kind of hands-on expertise and kind of manpower, so to speak, to move ideas from the PowerPoint slide and actually put them into action. So helping prioritize roadmaps, helping to look at different initiatives, understand who the vendors are. We're vendor agnostic, so we really work with anybody, the best solutions that are right for the client, and then help get those vendors into place and ultimately roll those things out, so that you're not just talking about ideas forever, but you're actually actioning on them.
So sorry for interrupting you. I like to emphasize something that you just mentioned, which is from presentation to put into reality, which is something which is dramatic and very important in any market, which is one of the things that most entrepreneurs sometimes miss out of putting the ideas into reality. So just for everyone to have a bit more knowledge in that, how do you come up with that transformation? I mean, what was your mindset in that point of passing on from a presentation to, to the reality point of view?
Well, I think it started at, I think most of the companies that I've been at, whether it be a startup or during the dot-com boom, or even when we got to Westfield, there's this idea that like we need to move and we need to move quickly. And, the reality in real estate is obviously real estate is a long game.
Yeah,
And so, everybody, tenants are signing 5, 10, 20-year leases, right? And you have, finance teams who are looking at 5, 10, 15-year projections. That kind of goes in the face of technology and innovation. And so I think it was really, we saw a lot of companies in our space that were really kind of like, okay, we'll do this. And they kind of thinking about even technology kind of in the old world software development, like, okay, this year we'll do this. And then next year we'll do this.
yeah,
When in reality now it's all about sprints, right? How do you get things up quickly? And the beauty, obviously, of a lot of technologies is where what you can't do in real estate is it's very expensive if you fail. For example, if you build a building wrong, or it's not to code or whatever,
yeah,
that's an expensive thing that you have to deal with. You can afford to fail in technology. You can afford to try things. Obviously, your goal is not to fail, but you can test and learn very quickly. And I think that's a different mindset and a different kind of ethos, so to speak, that needs to go into this thinking. So we found that a lot of our clients, and just as we talked to other people as well, they were kind of stuck a bit in this analysis paralysis, where maybe they worked with one of the larger consulting firms and they got this beautiful 200-page PowerPoint. They gave them a bunch of ideas, but then they didn't know how to go in action on them.
yeah,
And so that's where I think where our story has resonated is, guys, we're going to come in and help. We're actually going to provide the pairs of hands to do this. We're not going to tell you what to do and you have to go do it. We'll actually work with your teams. We'll take on a lot of that work. We'll help you actually get these things up and live, so that you're not trying to do this as part of your day job. And so I think that's really resonated in the market with us.
sure, sure. You made a significant transformation regarding real estate, implementing AI and several technologies. Can you just detail a bit about that and how the transformation has actually made that positive impact in the market?
Absolutely. So, I think the interesting thing with AI specifically, it's obviously the buzzword. It's on everybody's mind right now.
Yeah,
And the reality is that most of the new technology that's out there has AI in it. I think the misconception with a lot of people who aren't in the industry is that AI is this standalone thing, right? Certainly, there are these new tools that everybody's using, like ChatGPT, and it feels like a new thing, but ChatGPT is, you could look at it as an evolution of Google search, as an example,
yeah,
right? And so I think, again, dating myself, if I always kind of make the analogy, if everybody remembers when Intel was really marketing itself, and you'd see a TV advertisement from a laptop manufacturer, and in the end you kind of see that little widget and say, Intel inside. It's really now AI inside. And so
yeah,
I think that's what everybody needs to help simplify it and to make it less scary. It's really, AI is optimizing and making better a lot of the tools and technologies that are available or you're putting in place today. It's not a standalone robot in most cases, or a driverless car. Certainly there's a lot of AI in those things, but it's really just improving what we're already using, and certainly has spawned a new set of tools and applications as a result. But I think we're still very early days, is my point. And so, in terms of the things that we are putting in place with clients, or we're seeing a lot of, certainly there's, I think a practical example would be kind of the evolution of a chatbot, right? So
yeah,
you go to somebody's website, nobody loves interacting with a chatbot. I think for the most part, usually they're fairly clunky. You have to ask a question exactly the right way in order to get a good answer. Now you can obviously, and this is the key, as long as you give that bot access to a lot of data behind the scenes, you now can do a much more of a free form conversation and get much better results. So I think that's a easy kind of quick win that a lot of companies are looking at. And a lot of times it doesn't necessarily mean replacing your vendor. The vendor you've put in place may have just upgraded their system, and now you can take advantage of
yeah.
that technology. I think where it gets really interesting from a real estate perspective, even more so maybe than the guest or the tenant experience, is on the building operation side. Um, if you think about what Google Nest is for your house, right? You now have a little bit of intelligence on your building from a heat and
Yeah, yeah.
trying to economize some of your energy use. Now you have the ability to kind of understand the health of your building and really take advantage of the systems. Like, what's the HVAC system saying? What's the heat? Um, what are some of the other? What's the electricity kind of giving you from a data perspective? And then how do you take all those inputs, put it into the machine, so to speak, and then start to optimize your building, but not where you're turning the dials, but the system is doing it for you. So you're now getting a more efficient building, more eco-friendly, et cetera. And there's actual cost savings, which I think in any, everybody's looking for the ROI and all these investments, right? And I think that's really where you're seeing a lot of immediate ROI is
especially in sectors like real estate, because people invest money, they expect fast returns and quick, so it's very dramatic. Of course, it's sometimes stressing, because the returns of investment not always are are that fast, as we all know. But
Yep.
but yeah, as you were just explaining, of course, we having a significant transformation in the sector to have faster returns, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, in your perspective, how you think, in the sectors that you've been working on with your companies, how you think is going to be transformed in this stage and in near future, and what kind of transformations we're looking at?
Well, that's a broad question. So I mean, in terms of, again, in terms of transformations, I think everybody's trying to figure out how do they leverage everybody, and especially in real estate, how do you do more with less? And obviously technology enables you to do that. So we talked about the chatbots, we talked about, building management systems.
Sure.
Leasing is another area where kind of asset management and leasing is another place where that gets interesting. Simple example on the leasing side, if somebody is, a lot of companies have their leases from all their tenants, and they may have a leasing platform, but every time they go to write a contract, they've got to kind of, it almost has to be from scratch, or maybe they have their templates, but maybe something new comes up and they want it, instead of having to go through reams of old contracts, there's now this kind of term lease abstraction, which enables you to essentially use AI to say, look, I'd like to see across all my leases, like, have we ever done this before? For example, have we done this one clause? And is there a clause already written that I could literally, copy paste and put into this lease agreement, so that now we're doing this much more quickly. And I think that makes things more efficient from, obviously the person doing the leasing, but also from a legal perspective. You still need some oversight, certainly from legal, but you don't necessarily need legal writing all your, clauses if that's been written before. So I think that's a simple example. From an asset management perspective, I think, just again, understanding, having a system to manage all of your assets, especially if you have a large portfolio.
Yeah.
And then you layer in things like the building management system data into that. So it's not just understanding your assets and what they're doing. What are the health of those assets from, like literally the inside the building to financial performance to, other things that you want to attach to that information. So it's really more than ever, I think, giving people kind of a dashboard into what's going on in their business. And I think that's something that every executive would love to have. Yeah. And, for a long time, things have been and especially the data has been in very disparate systems. Now there's this opportunity to really bring it all together.
I think from your perspective is, especially very large companies which have a huge amount of data, and most of the times are dispersed. And at high level, you would like to see, a single point of view of all the information on it. And I think most of times they're not getting it, So I think with that, you made an achievement in the market, which many companies have not achieved yet, right?
Yeah, I think, it's a journey. I would be, I think, remiss to say that, like, wow, we've got it all figured out, or everybody's got it all figured out. But I think that's
right.
that's the part of any project, whether you're talking about physical real estate or you're talking about technology, right? It's always evolving. And I think that's the key thing is like what you put in place today, especially technology wise, in a couple of years, it might be obsolete or less, and that's okay. I think you have to be willing to live with, okay, I'm incrementally making enhancements to my property or my business through technology. And those are the things that, again, in kind of like the way in which people are thinking about these things needs to evolve so that you can be more adaptable to different changes that are coming. And you see that in the real estate world in general too. You see shorter leases, you see more creative financing around leases. So there's certainly, it's not just applicable to technology, but really the business at large.
We mentioned about real estate. I think you're doing the same transformation with cars and many other sectors. Would you like to go through them too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ancillary sectors for us, certainly hospitality. We have some restaurant clients as well. When you talk about the guest experience, building management, all those things obviously tie together pretty nicely.
Yeah.
I think in terms of just areas like what gets me excited or what do I think is cool? I mean, I live in San Francisco. Obviously, we're kind of in this tech bubble anyway.
Yeah.
But we do have self-driving cars driving around now. That's you have your standard Uber or your Lyfts, and then you have your there's a company called Waymo here that is doing that. I think Uber actually just announced a partnership where you can actually book a self-driving car through their app. So, and those have been driving around for 2 years testing. And then, about a year ago or so, they opened it up for passengers. And my parents were recently visiting me from another city, and it was fun. I didn't tell them I was going to get this car for somewhere we were going, and then to see their reaction, sitting in that car for the first time. There's very few kind of, there's always those moments, I think, as you go along the way, right? I think the first time, like, we all looked at the internet or sent an email, and then it was, okay, now we can connect to Wi-Fi, and we don't have to have a cord connected to our computer, and I can go sit in the living room instead of sitting at my desk. Another one, right? And I think there was this kind of the power of AI, maybe when you first used ChatGPT, was pretty interesting, or created that first image. And I think, these are kind of these moment in time, like, amazing evolutions that are happening. So I think certainly the self-driving cars get pretty interesting. And it's also relevant, which, I don't think a lot of people think about, but, think about from a real estate perspective, a lot of these shopping centers have massive parking lots, right? Where you're essentially giving up, you may or may not be charging for that parking, but you're essentially giving up large swaths of real estate to make sure people can park on the property instead of actually putting that into a lease. Now, if you have self-driving cars everywhere, you don't need to have parking spaces that are nearly as wide. You don't need to have as many parking spaces because those cars can drive around elsewhere. They don't need to be on your property. Right. So suddenly there's an actual real estate impact to something completely outside the industry as a result. And obviously we're not there yet, but I think we're starting to see properties start to plan for that. Like, maybe I don't have to have a huge parking lot. Maybe I can get away with something much smaller. Therefore, again, I can lease it out or do something else with that physical space.
How did you felt, getting in? I didn't have that experience yet. So I'll ask you, how did you felt on getting in a car with no driver? How was your perception, and how did you felt? It's because it's really different. You usually get in the cab and you see to a driver. You make up conversation. So how was your perception and your feeling about that?
I was taken aback by how quickly I wasn't. I mean, it was kind of the car itself. They're nice, kind of newer Jaguars. So the car itself is a nice car. So usually nicer than the Uber you're getting into. But I was surprised at how quickly I wasn't paying attention. Like, at first you're like, this is a little strange to watch those steering wheels spin and nobody's sitting in the car. Honestly, I was more annoyed that I couldn't talk to the driver because I felt like they weren't going the most efficient route. That was my more annoyance. But you quickly get used to, you're sitting there, it's enjoyable. I'm not somebody who likes to get in an Uber usually and chat, or a taxi and be super chatty. Usually I'm coming from the airport or somewhere else, and I just want to kind of be in my own thoughts or catch up
Sure.
on my phone or something.
Sure.
And so it's peaceful from that perspective, right? You're not having to interact with the driver. And then again, it feels very safe. It feels very safe, and it's really interesting how quickly you get used to it.
Amazing, amazing. So you had that experience already. So it's something really thrilling that I'd like to have in someday. In Europe, we're not that advanced yet. I mean, there's not so much self-driving cars around here yet. So I think we are a bit set back regarding that. So about all your experience, you had in all these sectors, real estate, innovation, infrastructure. What was your main, let's just say, gap that you saw that still needs to be improved, and how you got into that to make that adjustment, and what would you think the market should do to make it easier to make that transformation to whatever it has to go? Let's just say
Okay. Do you mean from a real estate perspective or just technology overall?
technology overall. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Gosh, sure. It's a great question. I think, it's interesting. I think one of the things that we've always kind of believed is it's not just about technology. It's about, not, don't just do technology for technology's sake, right? It needs to be solving an issue. I think certainly we just talked a lot but the transportation issue. And, when Uber, for example, when Uber first got started here in San Francisco, because unlike a lot of American cities, it was impossible to get a taxi, especially
right,
on a weekend night. You call, the phone would ring forever. You literally had to plan hours into your night in order to make even pretend like maybe you get somewhere across the city. Now, obviously, it's at your fingertips, but that was born out of a necessity here, and then obviously that convenience translated to the rest of the world. Um, I think we're going to start to see autonomous air vehicles as well. I mean, there's certainly been autopilot from an airplane perspective. I know
sure,
there are companies working on, like, and obviously this is going to be for people who can afford it, but it's avoiding traffic and being able to take a self-driving helicopter across a swath of a region here in the Bay Area. We've got a lot
yeah,
of bridges, a lot of traffic. If I could just make a hop that takes 5 minutes instead of sitting on the bridge for an hour, that would be amazing. So I think there's, there are those gaps in the market. I think another thing as well, I think, which is really interesting is certainly drone delivery,
okay,
and not just for consumer products, but things that are happening in the medical field, for example, with organ donors. Like
yeah,
there's obviously somebody's
yeah,
in the hospital, they need that organ now. That whatever they need maybe a couple hours away, instead of again sitting through traffic or having to get on a flight. So you can just take off and land. I think that's we're seeing a lot of breakthroughs there. And in other countries, the U.S. obviously has a pretty strict the FAA, which kind of manages all the air traffic.
yeah. That's the other thing I was going to mention, because I was
Yeah,
following through that because when I saw, for example, Amazon try to launching delivery through drones, there was some retaliation from FAA because of airspace. Is that already solved, or is still
it,
ongoing?
it's still ongoing. It's starting to get solved in certain cities. Um, we have a couple clients in Australia that were testing Google Wing, and they were delivering. They had a little kind of drone kind of launch pad on the top of
Okay,
their buildings, and they were actually sending same day delivery packages, both hard goods as well as food, to customers. So, and I think there is a real benefit to a lot of that stuff too. If you're actually doing a lot of that delivery via drones, and I think there's an argument to be made. Like, I don't necessarily want to see drones flying over my house all the time, but it takes a lot of cars off the road too. And so I
yeah.
think there is a trade-off from a traffic, a congestion, certainly a pollution perspective.
Yeah,
Um,
pollution perspective, I think most of all would be a great reduction, because if we're talking about 1,000 cars, it's not very significant. But if we're talking about over 30 or 40,000 cars, nationally. It's a huge reduction, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's something that needs to be looking at.
Yep. Exactly. So I think, I mean, gosh, there's so many areas. I mean, certainly robotics is getting interesting right now. If you look at manufacturing plants, obviously they've had robotics for years, but you are seeing a lot more automation, whether that's robotics, even in something again more related to my industry. Fulfillment. You look at a lot of fulfillment warehouses where they're organizing packages for different deliveries. A lot of that's now being done not just by humans, um, but by machines, and so that makes things a lot more efficient, a lot more cost effective. Um, and then I'm even excited about the next kind of wave, and it's not here yet, but you've seen a lot of announcements recently around quantum computing.
Yeah.
Um, and in short, quantum's going to, when it becomes to fruition, it gives us the ability to calculate much larger data sets that would take traditional computers years, if not decades, potentially doing that in a matter of
Yeah,
minutes, seconds, minutes, or
I
hours.
would say especially in aviation and things that involve a lot of physics. Definitely, I see quantum computing revolutionizing, these two areas at least, because of the amount of calculation that is required to be so precise and so quickly. I think definitely will make a positive impact in those two areas, which will actually involve in aviation and everything regarding aerodynamics, which goes back to even the drones itself. Maybe they can fly faster. So we're talking about a lot of change that can come up in the near time, right?
Yeah, and other things too, like drug discovery,
Yeah,
certainly tackling environmental problems. Um, Now, I think one big issue that comes up that maybe nobody's thinking about that much. The whole idea of security and encryption. If we
yeah,
now have these huge data sets, there's a whole new protective revolution that's going to have to happen because people have access to real quantum computing. They're going to be able to crack a lot of the cryptography is going to have to change a lot from a tech perspective because you're now going to be able to crack codes that again might have taken 10, 20 years to do with a traditional computer. But it's fascinating. I think fascinating to think about using physics and science to calculate math problems. I think and I think what's really interesting too. It's not intuitive. I've done a bunch of reading on it lately, and I've had to reread. I
yeah.
mean, I'm not a scientist, but I've been in technology for a long time, and it is not intuitive. It is something you have to kind of really get your head around because it's complicated stuff.
Yeah. How would you think, from your perspective, how would quantum computing will help, in the work you do? Do you think will be very significant, just a little bit, a lot?
I mean, it's hard to tell. I think what maybe potentially gets interesting, right, is you're looking at a lot of property owners are starting to, if you look at like site selection, for example,
Yeah.
for a new site, how to predict everything from, there's obviously a lot of data now out there about around the demographics of a trade area or, behavioral patterns, and especially once if you tap into data from an existing property, what's happened over time. I mean, AI is going to be able to do a lot of this, but I think if you add on quantum, like the amount of data you can crunch to really start to forecast traffic, um, NOI, other things that are going on with that property, you get to be a lot more efficient, I think, than where we are now. And even things like just understanding, okay, traffic patterns. Like if I'm a marketer and I'm trying to figure out how to get more people to my property, um, okay, what are the best times for me to be marketing? What's gonna resonate? What's going to when am I wasting my money because people aren't going to come either way? So I think those are the kind of things. And again, a lot of that gets solved with AI, but I think if you add on this extra kind of computational power, it could get really interesting.
Nice, nice. So, David, from all this, how you see yourself between you and the work you do and the markets within the next 5 years? I mean, what things do you think will change, or what are you going to change or not? So in this way, for people to understand, if they are in touch with you, your perspective, your ideas for projects, new projects coming up, for them to have
Hmm.
better perception?
Well, I think the next 5 years is going to be just a lot of adoption of the technology that's just coming onto the market. Again, I always kind of joke that in a lot of cases, everybody wants to be the first to be second, right? They want to be on the cutting edge, but they want to know somebody's tried it first. In real estate, it's everybody wants to be the first to be 19th. Usually, there's a lot of,
Right.
it's a conservative industry overall, and so there's still a lot of companies that are playing catch up. They're talking a lot about it, but they aren't necessarily putting in place a lot of the tools. And then once they put the tools in, a lot of times there's not a lot of adoption or education internally. And that's where we're also seeing a big gap in the market is how do you educate your teams that, hey, we're not just putting the systems in place just to have them, but you now have to use them. And I go back to, I guess when I was at CNET ages ago, and we decided to change email platform. The IT department decided to change email platforms. Interface was generally the same. Guess what? It's still emailed. It still got email. It still basically worked the same as the old platform. It was just a different system. And
Yeah.
the amount of uproar internally over changing an email system was crazy. Like I was like, it was kind of my first experience with that kind of change. And yet it still did the same thing. And so now you take that one step further into, say, the leasing world. And like now maybe I was doing my leasing on spreadsheets, and now I'm doing them. I have to use this new leasing platform,
Right.
even though long term, once I get up to speed on it, it's going to make my life much easier, more efficient. That learning curve, there's a lot of friction there sometimes, depending on the staff. And so I think you're going to see this evolution. Like if people talk about AI as, oh, AI is going to replace everybody. I think the new workforce is going to be the people who know how to use AI
Yeah.
and adapt to that and use it more efficiently. That's going to be the next workforce. And so, um, and it's not. I don't know. It's as much about like, oh, I'm going to go take a Chat GPT class. Like it's really about getting in and using these tools. Um, and again, it doesn't have to be overnight, but it has to be some incremental growth, like we've all done in our careers over time. We've all
Yeah.
gained knowledge, and you just have to be willing to change and adapt. And I think that's going to be key, especially in an industry like real estate, which has some people who've been in the industry or even at one company
Yeah.
for 10, 20, 30 years. That's a big shift from where we've been for a long time.
Yeah, I like to emphasize two or three things that you talked about. One of them, of course, is a self process of learning. You should always keep up with the technology, the times. With some people, which we see in the market, sometimes they look for differentiality, but what they look for, it's already there. They're just not looking at, or they just lost themselves, putting themselves up to date with the current technologies. I think this is one of the most dramatic things that we most see very often. And the other part is how do you put up all together with the technology? Because we have a lot of technology right now out there, but most people don't know how to use it. It's, for example, even ChatGPT, which is a very basic thing. People who think that, oh, he's going to do it by itself, he's going to do everything. It's not for that. I mean, it's mostly to help you with your tasks, to make it more automated, to relieve you some time of your workforce, even for you and your teams, and use it prudentially and optimizing, And this is what I like to emphasize because most people are overusing, and you should not letting technology over control you. You should always control technology and keep up with it, of course, to help you, but not the other way around. And this is the idea of most people for having misinformation. They think that technology is going to overcome humans, and everyone is going to be ruled by machines. I mean, this is totally myth. And most people should really think, yes, technology is out there. It's to help you, but of course, you need to know how it works and how will optimize your work by yourself because each person can be working different sectors. So for each sector is a different way of working. You can adapt. You just need to know how to do it and make sure it works for you. And this is just I wanted to emphasize this because we see it very often now. People are extremely, thrilling with AI, but I mean the way it's been using it sometimes is overused and sometimes it's not being properly used. and we see that very often in the market. I mean, what is your perception regarding this?
100% agree. I mean, again, it goes back to don't just. It's not about technology for technology's sake. It is about what are the use cases you're trying to solve. A lot of times we'll go into companies and like, well, we've launched all these things, and there's not really there's either not a spec or kind of a business case written for it. And I'm not saying you have to write 10 pages of business case for everything you do. A part of going fast is to make things come up with a lean process. But you still need to define what you want to do from a business perspective, from a feature and technology perspective. You often see that where they know what they want to solve from a business perspective, but maybe they haven't written out, great requirements when they go to market to find a vendor or a set of vendors to meet those requirements. And then they pick a vendor based on incomplete requirements, and then they can't figure out why the vendor isn't meeting what they expected. And so it's just in everything else in life, it's all about setting expectations. And so if you do the harder work up front, then you're able to then go into those engagements and then have a much smoother launch process and relationship with your vendor, and making sure that everybody's kind of bought in from the beginning. So I think that's a key, is like, what are you trying to use this for? What are your actual requirements? Do the hard work to figure out what those are. I mean, not to be use folks like us who do this for a living every day, bring in help or figure out who in your organization knows how to do this best, and lean on that. But it is a specialized expertise. I think just as I wouldn't go into a property and say, okay, I know how to do all your leasing, or I know exactly what you should do in this space, and how to transform it from a physical perspective. In the same way, I think the folks on the real estate side, or in the physical world, so to speak, aren't as much of an expert on the digital side. And so I think it's really leveraging the combined expertise that helps people get to where they want to go to. Excuse me.
Absolutely. So, David, for example, for people out there in the market, if they want to reach you, how they can reach you, and how would you help them, in which sectors, for them to have a better perspective and transparency, how you can help, everyone that would like to out there.
Yeah, so I mean, the name of our company is NextRivet. Just www.nextrivet, nextrivet.com. You can go to our website. You can email me at david@nextrivet.com. I think our focus is really in the real estate sector, specifically whether you're a retail real estate property like a shopping center, commercial office, and as well as multifamily residential. Those are kind of the three areas that we specialize in. We can be dangerous in a few others as well, but I would say those are the three that we have the most expertise in. And really, it's about just understanding needs. We don't have to, if you've got a roadmap in place and you're executing, maybe you simply need more resources to help you execute. We're happy to do that. If you're just getting started, we can help you understand the market. We can help you, figure out the list of things you need to do. We can help you write those business cases we just talked about, help you select a vendor, all the way down to helping you get these things launched and live. So, but our best engagements are honestly, though, it's not about us off in a silo. It's really about working with the companies, and we're on weekly status calls, and it's not a big stand and deliver at the end of a project. It's really about how do we iteratively move the ball, down the field. Sure. And hopefully be cross-training your team as part of that, right? So it's not just, hey, we want to put something in place so that we're on board 5 years from now. The whole idea is to hopefully get to the place where, hopefully we're working with you, but on different projects. So we start on a set of projects, we get you all set up. You have a team in place to run those long term, and then we're helping you iterate on the next gen stuff, if that's applicable. So, we have a flexible business model in terms of how we work and engage with clients too. So, would love to have conversations with anyone who's interested in starting that conversation.
Awesome. So I would like to ask, just to make some shareable knowledge from all your experience that you face with. Of course, there's always ups and downs. What was your most dramatic outcome that you had to think of and face as a strategy? If you like to share, for example, for people just starting up a company right now, for things that they need to look at, difficulties, how to overcome them, and how you did overcome them, how you come up with that positive result.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I've been part of, founding team at a startups, a while ago now.
Sure.
And to look at, the, thing to get a company started. I mean, obviously we started our own company 5 years ago, so I guess we're still a startup in that from that perspective. But um, from as a tech startup, I mean, I think there's so many resources available to you that were not there before. I think it's much less expensive to get things started. You can do things fractionally. Again, you can lean on experts, whether it's us in the tech, for real estate companies like us. But as a startup, there are fractional HR companies. My wife happens to run one called Retain. There are a lot of services that you can pull into the business that you don't necessarily have to kind of bring on full-time people for, but that you can kind of rent, so to speak, or bring on as you need. Certainly from its tech stack perspective, everything's so much cheaper to get cloud storage, to get your platform set up. Certainly getting good people on board, not still not very, still not is probably going to be your biggest expense, and that's where you should be spending your money, is on your people and your human capital. But there's a lot of efficiencies that you can really take advantage of now, and certainly AI has come into play in a big way, whether you're doing automated outreach to potential prospects, or managing your own internal systems. I think it's a fascinating time to start a tech company, but I think also on the flip side, because
Yeah.
all those tools are so readily available, there's a lot of commoditization, and so a lot of people can quickly get started. So your competitive set in a lot of ways gets harder, and your time to market has to go faster, and you may not have the defensibility of 6 months or a year that you had in the past, when you can see. I mean, just look at, ChatGPT was up and everything
Right.
was going, and then you had DeepSeek from China just roll through suddenly, and it was like, oh my gosh, they did this fast. I mean, never mind, I'm not necessarily going to put all my data over in China right now, but like, the speed and the efficiency and the dramatically less investment that they had to make to get their platform up and running, versus the billions that some of the early companies had to do. You see just how quickly and how out of nowhere new competitors can come onto the market. And so I think that's the biggest challenge as a startup founder is how do you stay competitive, and how do you continue to move really, really quickly, knowing somebody's probably going to come in who's doing it cheaper and faster. And so you've got to get to your market quickly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, regarding the competitiveness, it also has to do, obviously, with GDP of the country, the market, and a lot of other aspects. The cost of life. So, would you say that you see a big transformation in this to make it cheaper? Would you think that this will continue on the same road?
I think so. And I think, just to add to my last comment, I think you're really figuring out what your focus is. I think, so many companies try to go too broad, and it's a cheesy statement to say, but there's kind of like the riches are in the niches.
Yeah.
Like how do you really focus on kind of the product market fit, but really like becoming great in one area, versus spreading yourself too thin across too many areas. I think is a challenge for everybody, right? You always want to go after the bright shiny object. You always want to get a new customer, but if you stay laser focused on who you're going after, I think that's, to your question, yes, I think the trend just continues. I think, we're in this AI moment that just seems to be going faster right now. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon. And so I think it's really just about how do you focus what you're going after, and be really, really good at what you do before trying to expand in other markets. And I think we've gone through that in our own business, right? There's a lot of other industries that we could be tackling right now. Everybody needs kind of this demystification help with kind of planning their technology strategy
True.
and actually going to market. We could do that across a lot of industries. But we've chosen to be kind of, again, as focused as possible in what we do in real estate, just because we know that would spread ourselves too thin, and then we become a vanilla solution across a lot of different industries versus a more focused kind of expert in what we actually do day to day.
Also, I like to emphasize that not all the time the same approach from the beginning, like saying, well, if I do this trend, I'll probably save some money, but probably in the near future will cost you more. I explain, if you go to a country that maybe using certain technologies it's cheaper back then or in that moment, you are sharing privileged information which later on you might have no control. So it's I mean, it's things that you look at. What I advise also to companies that don't look only about saving costs, because sometimes it can cost you more than actually savings that what you think of, right? Especially
Yep.
to each country you're taking your information to, which platform, what people will be using that platform together with you. So I mean, have really a fairly analytic research regarding this, because what I always say is not everything is money, because what you can save today it can cost you millions tomorrow, or not, but it can, because as soon as you share, for example, privileged information to a foreign country or foreign technology that might be cheaper in that specific moment, but it's not fully secured, or or the government is not fully open as democratic country or whatever. So have a big look at in all the perspectives, because that could cost you more, in the future, especially if
Sure.
you're talking about patented, paperwork or investigation regarding software you're designing. There is something not yet in the market, things like this. That's really the perspective, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, David, anything else you like to add about any subject that we maybe missed until now?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So, no, I think again, I just to reiterate, it's more than anything, if you're looking at technology and as maybe a traditional business, whether it's real estate or otherwise, it's just important to get started, right? You don't have to execute on a roadmap of 30 projects out of the gate. I think it's you can either just be stuck and not do anything, or try one or two things just to
Yeah.
get started. And that's really kind of the push a lot of times people need to, like, once they see the process and get going, like, okay, now I have a better handle on what we're going to do next, or how to go get that accomplished. And so I think you just can't afford to stand still. And so, but you don't have to boil the ocean either, especially when you're first getting started.
And just to continue your analogy, and don't stress yourself if you think that you're not getting the first time. I mean, setting
Yep.
up technology or a business is not something that in 1 minute or to make in one day. It can take time. And I always say, if you don't get in the rain and you don't get wet, it means that you're not doing much. That's I always say. I mean, most people don't understand. I mean, you're a technical guy. I'm a technical guy, so I'm talking, deep technical, perspective. Sometimes it takes thousands of times, testing something, for people who don't know,
Yeah.
especially in labs. I mean, sometimes you do a task maybe 500 times, and maybe on 501 it gives an error, and you need to go back again over and over again. Why? When you arrive to 501, it gives that, and it didn't give before. So, I mean, it really a matter of, in the end, of being patient. It's when you sure about technology and you have all the data and you know it works. It's just a matter, to continue testing, evolutionize, and keep it up with everything, because it's not going to be perfect. You just don't stress yourself when you release something that you think is going to be perfect in the first version. Oh, it won't.
Absolutely.
I'm just telling you that. For people who listen, that will never happen. This is reality. So what you need to do is just be patient and have a good team of maintenance, ready set, whenever there's a bug or or error or whatever, to fix and release updates, and that's really the lifetime of everything. I mean, we see it all the time. For example, with Microsoft, with Google, people need to understand it's worldwide reality. I mean, there's updates all the time. There's new versions. There's new features. So it's just a matter of know exactly what you want to go, uh, where you want to go exactly. Because if you're doing a transformation in a technology or you want that specific transformation, it has to get you somewhere, not just because you're designing it to putting it there to work and then you don't really know how to proceed or why you got there and you don't know. I mean, there's a lot of steps that you need to follow through. One is where you want to go, how you want to get there, and what exactly you need to get there, and just put it in that imitating technology and throw us through step by step. But like I said, it's not about releasing the version and it's perfect the first time. Well, it takes time, sometimes years, depending how extensive the technology and how many interconnecting points you have. Because if we're talking about putting it all together with IoT, I mean, then there's a different story. We're talking about maybe thousands of devices, firmwares, updates, so it may take years. So it's just a matter of the perspective. What do you exactly want to do? What do you want to innovate? And how far you want to get? You want to get really global. You want to get national. So put yourself into place saying, this is what I want. This is my market. And this is my goal and milestone, which is something very important that most people miss sometimes when they are trying to release something and get into the market to a specific sector, right? I mean, what's your perspective?
No, I think well said. I mean, I think to sum it up, it's, there's a saying here in Silicon Valley, it's like, launched is better than perfect. Like, as long as you have a minimal viable product or an MVP, get it live. And then, but once you launch, it's not done. And I think that's, especially, I think tech companies do that because they're obviously always iterating on their platforms. But I think that's the key thing with our clients is, okay, let's get it launched, but we'll get it launched and let's use it and let's test it and let's try it and then let's tweak it and then let's iterate on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you're never done. I mean, the reality is you're never done. And so I think there's a misperception, like, once I get this thing live, it's going to be great, and then we don't have to think about it again. It's actually the opposite. It's
that kind of myth, right? That we all hear.
Yeah. It's the opposite. You need to now think about this all the time, but the good news is it's live, and now you're iterating on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, David, was really, I think, very insightful conversation. I think most people now will know who is David and what you guys do, and how you've been helping, so much, the sectors you're working in, which is very substantial to make, people lives easier. So I congratulate you for that and all the amazing work that you and your team are doing.
Great.
So
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a fun conversation.
yeah, likewise. So before we finish, I always say to my guests for them to say a power message. So what would be your power message today?
Power message. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I would say, it is, you have to get started now.
Right.
You can't afford to wait. And even if you do something small, just push the ball forward to get started. That is the critical thing, and get out of your analysis paralysis. If you make a mistake, it's okay. But ultimately, like, if you're not testing and learning and failing, you're not trying. And ultimately, if you're not trying to evolve your business, just like you do in every area of your business outside of technology, then ultimately you're going to get bypassed by your competitive set.
Yeah. And also, there's also the perspective of people thinking that, no, it's a failure. Well, don't be afraid of saying it. It's part of success.
Yeah.
In the end, if all this is part of your success, it means that you have perseverance, and that's how you get to where you want to get. Because you always need to put in, not as failures, it's takedowns, because that didn't work and that is not the correct path where you want to go. So it's just extra experience that you achieved to know that you need to have another route, to try and get and continue until you get where you want to get. So that's also very important, for people to know and understand that you need to really be perseverant, because sometimes you have in your mindset and and your ideas saying, "Oh, I'm going to launch it like this, and this is going to be like this," and sometimes it twists around and goes somewhere else. So it's not a bad thing. It just you're not expecting that. You just need to reroute and put it back together where you want to go. That's I think that's the main focus.
Yep, agreed.
So, David, was really a pleasure. It was really, really insightful conversation. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much for having you today. I appreciate it.
Thanks again, Julio. Appreciate it. Talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you.